Welcome back to another episode of Don't Waste the Chaos, the place where we make HR simple, leadership honest, and strategy sustainable. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts, and today we're diving into a topic I know many of us either overcomplicate or avoid altogether, and that is business strategy. But we're going to strip it down to the essentials. So whether you're leading a team of 3 or 300, your strategy doesn't have to be complicated in order to be powerful. In fact, if it's not simple, it's probably not going to work. So let's talk about what actually makes strategy effective and how to apply it in a way that drives people first growth. So strategy is not a plan. It's a set of choices. If you've ever read any Peter Drucker, he says strategy is a commodity, but execution is an art. Now, we often confuse strategy with vision or with planning, but Drucker reminds us that strategy is about decisions, what to do, and equally what not to do. It's not your to-do list, it's your clarity filter. In a Business Review article, Roger Martin wrote, strategy is not about aspirations, it's about making specific choices to win in the marketplace. So here's a litmus test. If your strategy can apply to any business, it's not really a strategy. So here are some questions that you need to be asking yourself. Who are we specifically here to serve? I know a lot of organizations are uncomfortable with sitting down and drafting out their client avatar, but I learned from the marketing and branding company that I worked with that it was the number one thing that I could do. Now, does that mean getting really narrow on who we are specifically here to serve? Does that mean that we then won't be reaching others with our message? Yeah, probably not, because they're not our ideal client, and that's completely fine. So who are we specifically here to serve? You need to ask yourself that. You need to get honest about it and then make sure that your marketing and your branding is around that. The next question you need to ask yourself is, what will we be world class at? And then the final question is, what are we going to stop doing? Now, if you can't answer those 3 questions very clearly, you're not necessarily being strategic. You're probably just being hopeful. So let me pull back the curtain a bit. Here's how I've personally applied these areas inside of Salt and Light. And then I also apply them in other businesses I help lead. So when it comes to a strategic filter, this is not just a vision board. And I hate to admit this, but I'm not a big vision board girly. I've made one before, but it's not necessarily my thing. I don't chase shiny objects. Every opportunity gets run through a strategic filter. And here's what I'm asking myself. Does this align with our mission to make HR like pressing the easy button? And then does it honor our brand values, which are humble efficiency, service, and clarity? And will this make sense in 12 months? So that's how I decided to launch my book. That's how I decided to build our collectives, which are our membership programs. We're being intentional, not impulsive. Okay, so we've talked about how strategy is not a plan, it's a set of choices. So let's get a little bit deeper here and talk about simplicity being strategic. So if everything is important, then nothing is. And Patrick Lencioni said that in one of his books. I love it. He talks about this in his book, The Advantage, where organizational health is the greatest competitive advantage. And one of the key ways to protect health, that's clarity. So he recommends that every organization answer 6 simple but powerful questions. Why do we exist? How do we behave? What do we do? How will we succeed? What's most important right now, and who must do what? So you don't need a 60-slide deck. You just need to answer these 6 questions. According to some research I've read by McKinsey, organizations that prioritize simplicity and strategic decision-making outperform their competitors by as much as 40% in long-term shareholder returns. So let's look at simplicity on the other side of complexity. Lencioni's 6 clarity questions and the ROC principle, which I pulled from the book Traction by Gino Wickham, Those are literally the guiding lights for me inside of my business. I revisit them monthly and quarterly with my team, even as small as we are. So we don't use that big, long slide strategic plan. We use a simple document that is literally up on my desktop background right now. It lays out our mission, our vision, our values, and our biggest goals. Then each month at our team meetings, we go over who's owning what we're saying no to, and what our distance to our goals are. That clarity makes delegation and momentum possible. So let's jump into how data should drive strategy, not detract from it. Back to Drucker, he says, what gets measured gets managed. I love that. I hear a lot of people say that. Dan Martell, one of my business coaches, says that often, originated with Peter Drucker, but I love it. Gino Wickham in the book, The Traction, which is the entrepreneurial operating system, and I'll link all these books in the show notes. He says, but not all metrics are created equal. So as he outlines in Traction, companies need to identify a handful of measurables that truly drive performance. If we've got a ton of huge, long dashboards, we're probably not really tracking them. We don't even know what the metrics mean. He encourages the use of a weekly scorecard, which is a simple tool to track 5 to 15 numbers that show whether our business is helpful. So here's a pro tip. Look for leading indicators, not lagging ones. So revenue is important, but what happens 90 days before revenue? That's what you track. According to a research report I read by PricewaterhouseCoopers, companies that are data-driven are 5 times more likely to make faster decisions than their competitors. That was put out by their Global Data and Analytics Survey. I love that. So yes, measure, but measure what matters. Don't get buried in dashboards. We want to be data-driven, but also people first. So in the business development section of my business, we use a weekly scorecard. And then we also use a monthly scorecard where we review leads and what the stages they're at, active clients, podcast downloads, referrals, and a lot more. But I also make sure that I'm doing a monthly people pulse, which is at a minimum one-on-one with each person in my organization. Usually it's more often. And in these, I'm checking in with my team's energy and clarity. If the metrics are up, but the morale is down, then something's broken. All right, let's move forward to the speed of execution inside of your strategy. This one's huge. So if you've read anything by Eric Ries, he says, a startup is a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And as an organization that's just at the beginning of year 3, I feel this so powerfully in my gut. It's a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. That is of any startup of any size. Now, you don't have to be a startup to adopt a startup mindset. Rees, in his book, The Lean Startup, reminds us that strategy isn't a set it and forget it. It's a cycle. We want to build, then we want to measure, then we want to learn. So we would test small and then iterate fast. The faster you learn, the better your decisions become. Now, Amazon does over 1,000 micro experiments in a day. Now, you and I, we're not Amazon, but could you run one experiment a quarter or one a month? Speed doesn't mean rushing. It means shortening the distance between the idea and then the insight you can get from it. So you've got the idea, you implement, you measure what you've done, and then you gain insight or learn from that. So small experiments drive big strategy. I also run experiments constantly in my organization. So I usually do like running email funnels with a certain lead magnet to test it and see what's working, or we trial a new service with one client before we scale it. It's really exciting to me. It's really fun. And if you can look at the projects inside of your business as experiments, you won't feel like a failure. You're just learning constantly. So I learned from Eric Ries that failure at a small scale is tuition, not trauma. That mindset helps to keep me nimble in my business. Now, let's talk about creative strategy, and that is a people strategy. Getting the right people and the right chemistry is more than getting the right idea. If you've read Creativity Inc., that came from Ed Catmull. I love that book, but I think it's really important to listen to what he's saying there. Getting the right people and the right chemistry is more important than getting the right idea. And so many of us want to come up with all of these great ideas, but we don't have the right people and the right seats in the bus to get them done. In Pixar's early days, Catmull focused not just on storyboarding, but also on creating environments where people could take their creative risks. That strategy too, so creating cultures of courage. If your business strategy isn't aligned with your people strategy, it's going to crack. Strategy isn't necessarily what's on paper. It's how people behave when you're not in the room, when you're the leader or you're the business owner. According to a Gallup poll I read, only 22% of employees strongly agree that their company's leadership has a very clear direction. And yet those who do have a 4.5 times higher percentage of being more likely engaged. That was Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report that they put out. 4.5 times more likely to be engaged workforce when you've got a clear direction set. But only 22% of employees strongly agree that that's happening in their organization. This is huge. Set a clear strategy, articulate it often, let people know what you're learning, what you're measuring, what it's telling you, and how you're going to pivot. You can't afford for strategy to live just at the C-suite level. It has to show up on your front lines every single day. You want to be culture first focused always. When I bring someone into my team or into a client organization, I care less about where they went to school and more about how they live the values. For me, are they kind? Are they proactive? Can they be trusted when no one's watching? Are they truly aligned with my business and where we're going? And for me, I have a strong personality. I am on the spectrum and I know what that looks like for people to work with me. I cannot have frenemies working in my business. I can't have someone who's literally just working for a job. I have to have someone who really is aligned with me as a person. Culture is the ultimate strategic advantage because it determines the how, not just the what. And then the last thing that I want to discuss today is how leadership shapes your strategic thinking. So a leader is the one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. I pulled that from a book by John Maxwell. So strategy without leadership is noise. And Maxwell in his writings remind us strategy is ultimately carried forward by people, and people follow clarity, consistency, and courage. Every week, leaders have the chance to reinforce what matters. Here are the things that Maxwell says matters in his books. Are you repeating your key messages? Are you modeling the priorities and how you spend your time as the leader? Are you inviting feedback or are you just pushing tasks on your employees? So leadership is not just part of the strategy. It is the strategy. Leadership is the anchor. As John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership, and I hold that really close. In my life, I try to seek wise counsel regularly. I've got a business coach named Dan Martell. I'm in his elite coaching group. I have weekly calls with him and I learn a ton from him. I've got an EFT coach. I utilize Kelly Howe. I've had her as a guest on the podcast before, and she helps me make sure that I'm honing in my personal skills and aligning with my personal desires and my giftings. I also, of course, regularly speak to my husband. He's got a ton of experience. He knows me personally. I speak to my therapist. I talk to my 2 best friends. I read a ton. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I'm constantly seeking wise counsel and working to apply it in my business. My goal is to be the same person in the boardroom, on my podcast, in my author journey, and also on my farm. So here is your challenge for the week. Pick one area where you've been reacting instead of choosing. We don't want to react. We want to respond. We want to choose. That is your strategic tension point, and this is where you are going to grow. Strategy isn't something you make in January and forget about by March. It's something you live out every Monday morning, every single morning, and how you lead, how you listen, and how you decide. If this episode resonated, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend or with your leadership team or with a colleague. And if you're ready to get real about aligning your business and your people strategy, I'd love it if you'd reach out. So don't waste the chaos, embrace it. Until next time.